The fluorescent lights of the mess hall hummed with a low, buzzing energy that seemed to vibrate through the plastic trays and the heavy industrial tables. It was 1800 hours at Fort Sterling, and the air was thick with the smell of overcooked Salisbury steak, floor wax, and the weary sweat of 500 soldiers. The noise was a constant roar. A mix of clattering silverware, heavy boots dragging across linoleum, and the boisterous shouting of young men and women who had spent 12 hours under the sun. In the far back corner, tucked away in a booth that saw very little light, sat a woman who looked like she wanted to be invisible. Her name was Anna, though nobody in that room had bothered to ask. She was small, maybe 5'4", with her dark hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her uniform was clean but faded, the fabric softened by 1,000 washes. She didn't have the flashy patches of the airborne units or the bright, arrogant polish of the new arrivals. She looked like a clerk, or perhaps someone who spent her days filing paperwork in a basement office where the sun never reached. Anna was focused entirely on her food. She ate with a mechanical precision, her eyes never straying from her plate. To anyone passing by, she was just background noise, part of the furniture, and that was exactly how she liked it. A few tables over, the atmosphere was different. A group of 5 recruits, fresh out of basic training and recently assigned to the advanced infantry course, were making sure everyone knew they had arrived. They were loud, their laughs cutting through the general din of the hall like a serrated knife. They were led by a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a shaved head and a neck that seemed wider than his skull. His name tag read, Henson, and he carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who had been the biggest kid in his high school and hadn't yet met a wall he couldn't punch through. Henson scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. The mess hall was packed. The only empty spots were at the very back, near the small woman sitting alone. He nudged his friends, gesturing toward the corner. "Look at this," Henson smirked, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Someone's taking up a whole 6-person booth all by herself. Don't she know space is at a premium?" His friends chuckled, a pack mentality instantly clicking into gear. They were tired, they were hungry, and they were looking for a way to feel powerful after a long day of being yelled at by drill sergeants. Pushing a quiet woman around seemed like an easy win. They began to walk over, their heavy boots thudding in a rhythmic, intimidating tempo. As they approached, the soldiers at the nearby tables began to go quiet. People sensed the shift in the room. It was that primal instinct, the feeling of a predator moving toward something it perceived as weak. Anna didn't look up. She heard the boots. She smelled the sour scent of their unwashed fatigues as they drew closer. She felt the air change as they surrounded her table, but her hand didn't shake as she lifted a forkful of mashed potatoes to her mouth. Henson reached the table first. He didn't sit down. Instead, he slammed his tray onto the plastic surface right next to hers, causing her water cup to rattle. His 4 companions moved with practiced coordination. 2 stepped to her left, blocking the path toward the dish return. 2 moved to her right, crowding the aisle. Henson stood directly in front of her, leaning over the table so his shadow completely eclipsed her meal. "Hey, Private," Henson said, his voice dropping into a low, mocking growl. "I think you're in our seats." Anna swallowed her food slowly. She finally looked up. Her eyes weren't wide with fear, nor were they narrowed in anger. They were flat. They looked like the surface of a deep pond still, dark and impossible to read. "There are plenty of seats at the long tables near the front," Anna said. Her voice was calm, conversational, and lacked any hint of a tremor. It was the kind of voice you'd use to tell someone the time of day. Henson laughed, looking back at his buddies. "Did you hear that? She's giving us directions. We don't want the front, sweetheart. We like the view back here. We like the privacy. And right now, you're in the way." One of the recruits on the left, a wiry guy with a nervous energy, leaned in closer, his elbow nearly touching Anna's shoulder. "Yeah, we've had a long day. We don't feel like walking back and forth. Why don't you be a nice girl, take your tray, and go find a spot on the floor somewhere?" The mess hall had fallen almost completely silent now. The clattering of forks had stopped. Even the kitchen staff were peering through the serving window. Everyone knew what this was. It was a classic power play, the kind of bullying that happens in closed environments when people think they can get away with it. Anna looked at the four men surrounding her. They had boxed her in perfectly. There was no way out without physically pushing past one of them. To the casual observer, she looked like a trapped bird. "I'm not finished with my dinner," Anna said simply. She picked up her napkin and wiped a small spot of gravy from the corner of her mouth. Henson's face reddened. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by someone who looked like she weighed half as much as he did. He reached out a large, calloused hand and placed it on the edge of Anna's tray. "I wasn't asking," Henson said, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the plastic. "I'm telling you, you got 5 seconds to clear out before this tray and everything on it ends up on your lap." His friends moved in even tighter. Their shoulders were practically touching now, creating a wall of camouflage fabric. The air in the box felt hot and stifling. One of the recruits reached out and flicked the sleeve of Anna's uniform, a disrespectful gesture meant to provoke a reaction. "Tick-tock," the wiry one whispered. Anna looked down at Henson's hand on her tray. She then looked at the clock on the far wall. It was exactly 18,005. She took a slow, deep breath, her shoulders dropping as she entered a state of total relaxation. It was the kind of relaxation a spring has just before it's released. "You really should rethink this," Anna said. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a warning. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a strange kind of pity. Henson sneered, his fingers tightening on the tray. He began to pull it toward the edge of the table, ready to flip it. 5, he started counting. 4, 3. He didn't get to 2. In the span of a heartbeat, the quiet atmosphere of the mess hall was shattered. But it wasn't the sound of a freight. The quiet atmosphere of the mess hall was shattered. But it wasn't the sound of a tray hitting the floor. It was the sound of a sharp, sudden intake of breath and the heavy thud of a body hitting a table. The clock on the wall ticked to 18,005 and 30 seconds. By the time the next second ticked over, the 5 recruits would realize that the woman in the faded uniform was the last person on this base they should have touched. Henson didn't even see her hands move. 1 second, his fingers were curled around the edge of the plastic tray, and the next, his wrist was pinned flat against the table. It wasn't a slow movement. It was a flash of motion that seemed to defy the heavy, humid air of the mess hall. Anna hadn't used brute force. Instead, she had used the momentum of his own pull against him. With a quick, sharp twist of her palm, she had redirected his energy, and now his arm was locked in a position that made his entire body go stiff with a sudden, jolting shock of pain. The tick-tock from the wiry recruit died in his throat. The silence that followed was heavy. Henson let out a choked gasp, his face contorting as he tried to pull his arm back. But the more he struggled, the tighter the lock became. It felt like his wrist was caught in a vice made of steel rather than flesh and bone. He looked down, confused, seeing this small woman holding him in place with what looked like minimal effort. She wasn't even standing up yet. "Let go," Henson hissed, his voice cracking. He tried to swing his free hand, a clumsy, wide arc intended to knock her away. Anna didn't flinch. She simply leaned her head back an inch, letting the fist whistle past her nose, and then she finally stood up. As she rose, she didn't move away from the confrontation. She moved into it. She stepped into the narrow space between the table and the bench, sliding into the center of the circle the 5 men had created. The two recruits on her right reacted instinctively, reaching out to grab her shoulders. In their minds, they were just going to hold her down. But as soon as their hands made contact with her uniform, Anna vanished from their grip. She dropped her weight low, spinning like a top. Her movement was so fluid it looked like she had no bones. As she spun, her elbows caught the insides of their biceps, not a punch, but a precise strike to the nerves. Both men let out a yelp of surprise, their arms going momentarily numb as they stumbled back into the neighboring table. The wiry recruit and the fifth man, who had been standing guard at the back, froze. They had expected a scuffle. They had expected a girl to scream or cry or run. They hadn't expected a whirlwind. "What are you doing?" the wiry one shouted, his voice high-pitched with a mix of anger and genuine fear. He lunged forward, trying to tackle her by the waist. Anna stepped to the side, a movement so small it was almost invisible. She didn't trip him. She simply placed her foot in the exact spot where his balance was weakest. The recruit sailed past her, his own momentum carrying him face first into the empty bench she had just vacated. He landed with a dull thud, groaning as he slid onto the floor. Everything was happening in slow motion for the onlookers, but for the five recruits, it was a blur of confusion. Henson, finally managing to wrench his arm free as Anna focused on the others, lunged at her again. He was humiliated now. His face was a dark, angry purple, and he wasn't thinking about teaching a lesson anymore. He just wanted to crush the person who had made him look foolish in front of the entire base. He swung a heavy overhead right hook that would have laid out a man twice Anna's size. Anna didn't block it. Blocking took energy. Instead, she stepped inside the arc of the punch, getting so close to Henson that they were chest to chest. She placed her palm on his chin and her other hand on his shoulder. With a gentle, rolling motion of her hips, she guided his head upward. It was a simple lesson in physics. Where the head goes, the body must follow. Henson's feet left the floor. He didn't fall so much as he was guided into a backward roll over the top of the table. He landed on the other side, crashing into a pile of discarded trays with a sound like a car wreck. The mess hall was dead silent now. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the five recruits and the distant hum of the industrial refrigerator. The hundreds of soldiers watching had stopped eating entirely. Some were standing up to get a better view. Others were whispering to their neighbors, asking if anyone knew who she was. Anna stood in the center of the box that was no longer a box. The five men were scattered. Two were nursing their arms. One was untangling himself from the floor. One was staring at her in paralyzed shock, and Henson was struggling to get off the floor on the other side of the table. She didn't look like she had just been in a fight. Her hair was still perfectly in place. Her breathing hadn't even accelerated. She reached down and calmly straightened the front of her jacket, smoothing out a wrinkle that had formed during the scuffle. 30 seconds, she said quietly. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the hall, it rang out like a bell. The fifth recruit, the one who hadn't been hit yet, took a step back. He looked at his friends, then back at Anna. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't malice. It was the look of a professional looking at an amateur's mistake. It was the look a master carpenter gives a piece of wood that has a knot in the wrong place. "Who are you?" the recruit whispered, his voice trembling. Henson finally scrambled to his feet, leaning against the table for support. He was shaking, a mixture of adrenaline and the realization that he had just been dismantled in front of 500 people. He opened his mouth to shout something, some kind of insult, to reclaim his dignity. But the words never came out. Because at that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the front of the mess hall swung open with a violent bang. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing fatigues. He was wearing a dress uniform with so much silver and gold on the shoulders it seemed to catch every bit of light in the room. Behind him followed two MPs, their faces carved out of granite. The entire room snapped to attention. The sound of 500 chairs scraping back at once was like a thunderclap. The high-ranking officer didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the mess on the floor or the scattered trays. His eyes locked onto the corner of the room where the 5 recruits stood frozen around the small woman. He began to walk down the center aisle. Every step he took was measured and powerful. As he drew closer, the recruits felt their hearts sink into their stomachs. They recognized him. This was the base commander, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on bullying and his legendary career in the field. Henson tried to stand straight, wiped a smudge of gravy off his face, and prepared to tell a lie. He prepared to say that the woman had started it, that they were just trying to sit down, that it was all a big misunderstanding. But the commander didn't stop in front of Henson. He didn't even acknowledge the 5 recruits. He stopped 3 feet in front of Anna. He snapped his heels together and offered a crisp, sharp salute that was reserved for only the most respected individuals. "The test is complete," the commander said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I trust the results were as expected?" Anna didn't salute back. She simply nodded once, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "They have a lot to learn about situational awareness, Colonel," she replied. The 5 recruits looked at each other, the blood draining from their faces until they were all the color of ash. They realized then that the box they had built hadn't been for her. It had been for them. The silence in the mess hall was so thick you could hear the hum of the overhead fans. The 5 recruits stood like statues, their mouths slightly open, their eyes darting between the small woman and the high-ranking colonel standing at attention before her. Henson, who only moments ago had felt like the king of the room, now looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His knees felt weak, and the spot on his wrist where Anna had held him began to throb with a dull, pulsing heat. The colonel didn't move. He waited for Anna to speak again. The way he stood shoulders back, chin tucked, eyes forward showed a level of respect that usually took decades of service to earn. This wasn't just a superior officer talking to a subordinate. This was a soldier acknowledging a master. Anna took a slow breath and stepped out from behind the table. She looked at the 5 men who had surrounded her. Up close, without the mask of her quiet victim persona, she seemed to grow taller. Her posture was perfect, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the tension. She didn't look angry. In fact, she looked disappointed, which was far worse for the men standing there. "You boys were looking for a fight," Anna said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "You saw someone you thought was small. You saw someone you thought was weak. You saw someone you thought was weak. You saw someone you thought didn't belong in your world, and you decided to use your numbers to make yourselves feel bigger." She walked a slow circle around the 5 of them. They didn't move. They didn't even breathe. As she passed behind Henson, he flinched, expecting another strike that never came. "In a real combat zone," she continued, "that kind of ego gets people killed. You were so focused on intimidating me that you didn't notice the entire room had gone quiet. You didn't notice the colonel walking through the front doors. You didn't even notice that I was leading you into every single movement I made." The colonel finally lowered his salute and turned his gaze toward the 5 recruits. His eyes were cold, like chips of blue ice. "Do any of you have any idea who you just laid hands on?" Henson swallowed hard, his throat feeling like it was full of sand. "No, sir," he managed to squeak out. "This is Chief Warrant Officer Miller," the colonel lied, using a cover name to protect her true high-level identity while still establishing her rank. "She is a lead strategist for close-quarters engagement. She has spent the last 15 years training the people who go into the places you only see in movies. She was sent here specifically to evaluate the new blood of this division." She wanted to see if the rumors about your lack of discipline were true. The colonel stepped closer to Henson, leaning into his personal space just as Henson had done to Anna. And it seems you proved the rumors right within 30 seconds of meeting her. The weight of the situation finally crashed down on them. These weren't just bullies who got caught. They were soldiers who had tried to assault an undercover evaluator. In the military, that wasn't just a mistake. It was a career-ending disaster. Anna walked back to her tray. She picked up an apple that had rolled to the edge of the table and turned it over in her hand. "The problem isn't just that you're bullies," she said, looking at the wiry recruit who was still nursing his bruised ego. "The problem is that you're predictable. You move in a pack because you're afraid to stand alone. You target the quiet ones because you think silence equals weakness." She took a crisp bite of the apple, the sound echoing in the silent hall. "In my world, silence is a tool. It's what we use right before we finish the job. You five have been in the service for what? 6 months? You think those uniforms make you tough? They don't. The uniforms are just fabric. What's inside it is what matters. And right now, all I see inside those uniforms are 5 scared kids who don't know the first thing about being a soldier." One of the recruits, the one who had stayed at the back, finally found his voice. We didn't know, ma'am. We were just joking around." Anna stopped chewing. She turned her head slowly to look at him. The simple look she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, professional intensity that made the recruit's words die in the air. "A joke?" she asked softly. "Boxing someone into a corner is a joke? Threatening to throw food on someone because they're sitting in a seat you want is a joke? Threatening to throw food on someone because they're sitting in a seat you want is a joke? Let me tell you something. When you're out in the field and you're tired, hungry, and stressed, your true character comes out. This," she gestured to the messy table and the scattered men, "this is your true character. You are the kind of men who turn on your own when things get a little uncomfortable." She looked at the colonel. "I've seen enough. They're not ready for the advanced course, not even close." The colonel nodded. "I agree. MPs." The 2 military police officers who had been waiting by the door stepped forward, their handcuffs rattling on their belts. The sound was like a final curtain call. The 5 recruits looked at each other, the reality of their situation setting in. They weren't going back to their barracks. They were going to the stockade, and from there, their future in the military was a very dark, very short tunnel. As the MPs began to lead them away, Henson turned back one last time. He looked at Anna, who was calmly sitting back down to finish her meal. She didn't look at Anna. She didn't need to. He realized then that he had never been in control of the situation. From the moment he walked toward her table, she had been the one in charge. He had been a puppet, and she had been pulling the strings the whole time. The rest of the soldiers in the mess hall began to whisper again, but the tone was different now. The bravado was gone. A quiet respect had taken over. They watched as the small woman in the faded uniform took another bite of her dinner, looking for all the world like just another person in the crowd. But they knew better now. They knew that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the loudest one. It was the one who was perfectly fine being ignored. Anna finished her apple and set the core on the tray. She looked at the colonel, who was still standing nearby. "Next time," she said, "pick a group with a little more spirit. These ones were too easy." The colonel actually cracked a smile, a rare sight for anyone on that base. "I'll see what I can do, Chief, but I think word is going to travel fast after tonight. You might find it harder to stay invisible." Anna shrugged. There's always another mess hall. And there's always someone who thinks they're the biggest fish in the pond. The following morning, the atmosphere at Fort Sterling had shifted. The story of the mess hall confrontation had spread through the barracks like a wildfire in a dry forest. By breakfast, everyone was talking about the ghost of the mess hall. They described how she had moved like a shadow and how she had taken down 5 of the biggest recruits on base without even breaking a sweat. But while the rumors grew more exaggerated with every telling, the woman at the center of the story was nowhere to be found. In a small, windowless briefing room on the far side of the administrative wing, Anna sat across from the colonel. She wasn't in her faded fatigues anymore. She was wearing a crisp, dark tactical fleece with no rank insignia and a pair of simple cargo pants. On the table between them sat 5 personnel files. These were the records of the men from the night before. The colonel leaned back, rubbing his chin. "They've been processed," he said, his voice heavy. "Henson is crying foul, saying he was provoked. The others are mostly silent. They know their time here is done. But I'm more interested in your formal assessment, not just the physical outcome." Anna opened the top file, Henson's. She flipped through the pages of his training history. He had high scores in marksmanship and physical fitness. On paper, he was a model soldier, but paper doesn't show what happens when the ego is challenged. "The problem isn't their skill," Anna said, her voice calm and steady. "It's their perspective. They view the military as a hierarchy of muscle. They think that because they are bigger, faster, or louder, they are inherently more valuable. That's a dangerous mindset in the field. When you're in a high-stress environment, you don't look for the loudest person. You look for the one who is keeping their head. Those 5? They lost their heads the moment I didn't act afraid of them." She tapped a finger on the table. "They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an object to be moved. If I had been an enemy combatant in a crowded marketplace, they would have been dead before they even drew their weapons. They were so busy trying to look tough for each other that they ignored every red flag I gave them." The colonel sighed. "I've seen it 1,000 times. Fresh recruits think the uniform makes them bulletproof. But I need to know, do you think any of them are salvageable, or do we wash them out entirely?" Anna didn't answer right away. She got up and walked to a small window that looked out over the training grounds. Down below, a fresh platoon was running drills, their rhythmic shouting echoing faintly through the glass. She watched them for a long moment. She remembered being in their shoes years ago, young, arrogant, and convinced she was invincible. "Henson is a lost cause for now," she said finally, turning back to the colonel. "He's too deep in his own ego. He doesn't want to be a soldier. He wants to be a bully with a badge." But the wiry one, the one who was following Henson's lead, he wasn't malicious. He was just trying to fit in. He was scared. That fear can be trained into caution. The other 3 are just sheep. They go where the loudest voice tells them to go. The colonel nodded, making a few notes. "So, we break the pack." "Exactly," Anna said. "You don't just punish them, you separate them. Put them in units where they are the smallest, newest members. Force them to earn respect through work instead of intimidation. If they can't handle being at the bottom of the ladder without throwing a tantrum, then you kick them out." She picked up her coffee cup, which was now cold. "But there's a bigger issue here, Colonel. This wasn't just about 5 guys. It's about the culture of this intake. If they felt comfortable doing that in a crowded mess hall in front of everyone, it means they thought nobody would stop them. They thought the people around them would either join in or look away." The colonel looked ashamed. "You're right. The bystanders are just as much of a problem. A unit is only as strong as its quietest member," Anna said. "If the quiet ones don't feel safe, the unit is broken." "I want to run a seminar, not a formal one. I want to do it on the mats, in the gym where everyone can see. I want to show them exactly how much toughness matters when you don't have discipline." The colonel's eyes brightened. He liked this idea. "A demonstration?" "A reality check," Anna corrected. I want you to gather the entire training company. Tell them there's a guest instructor. Don't tell them it's me. Let them think it's some big guy from the special forces. When I walk out onto those mats, I want to see their faces." The plan was set. For the rest of the day, Anna stayed out of sight. She spent her time in the base gym during the off hours, practicing her forms. She moved with a silent, lethal grace, her body a well-tuned machine. She wasn't doing it to show off. She was doing it to center herself. Tomorrow wouldn't be about fighting. It would be about teaching. As evening fell, Anna walked back toward her temporary quarters. She passed by the mess hall again. It was dinner time, and the noise was just as loud as it had been the night before. But as she walked past the windows, she noticed something different. The tables were less segregated. People were talking a bit more quietly. There was an air of uncertainty. The story of what happened to Hansen's crew had served as a warning. She saw a group of young female recruits sitting together near the door. They looked nervous, their eyes darting around as if waiting for someone to challenge them. One of them caught Anna's eye through the glass. Anna didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just gave a very slight, almost imperceptible nod of the head. The young recruit blinked, then sat up a little straighter. She squared her shoulders and turned back to her meal with a new sense of confidence. Anna kept walking, disappearing into the shadows of the barracks. She knew that by tomorrow evening, everyone on this base would understand that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to box anyone in. It just needs to be ready. The stage was set for the final lesson. The recruits thought they had seen what she could do in 30 seconds. They had no idea what she could do with an hour and a captive audience. The sun had not yet climbed over the horizon when the whistle blew. In the main training gymnasium, nearly 300 recruits stood in neat, silent rows. The air was cool, but the tension was high. Rumors had been flying all night that a specialist was coming to give a demonstration, and everyone expected a giant, some legendary commando with scars and a booming voice. The colonel stood at the front of the room on the black rubber mats. He didn't say a word as he checked his watch. The recruits shifted their weight, their eyes fixed on the double doors of the back of the gym. When the doors finally swung open, a collective breath was held. But it wasn't a giant who walked in. It was the same woman from the mess hall. Anna walked with a steady, purposeful gait. She was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and tactical pants, her feet bare for the mats. She didn't look like a warrior. She looked like someone's older sister, or perhaps a librarian out for a jog. As she stepped onto the mat next to the colonel, a few muffled whispers broke the silence. Some of the recruits who hadn't been in the mess hall the night before looked confused. A few even smirked. The colonel stepped forward. "Positions," he barked, and the room went dead silent. "Yesterday, 5 of your peers decided to test their strength against a lone individual. They failed. Today, you are going to learn why they failed. This is not a lesson in how to punch. This is a lesson in how to think." He turned to Anna and nodded. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the crowd. She didn't need a microphone. The gym's acoustics carried her voice perfectly. "I want the 5 biggest people in this room," Anna said. Her voice was soft but had a sharp edge to it. "Right now. On the mat." There was a moment of hesitation. Then, slowly, 5 massive recruits stepped forward. They were all over 6 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks. They looked at each other, then at the small woman standing before them. They looked uncomfortable. They didn't want to be the next ones to be embarrassed. "Don't worry," Anna said, sensing their hesitation. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want you to try to hold me down. No striking, no kicking. Just use your weight and your strength to keep me from moving. All 5 of you." The big men looked at the colonel, who nodded. They moved in, forming a tight circle around her. It looked like a forest surrounding a single sapling. On a count of 3, they lunged. They grabbed her arms, her waist, and her shoulders. They leaned their weight into her, using their combined mass of over 1,000 pounds to pin her to the center of the mat. For a second, it looked like she was gone, buried under a mountain of muscle. But then, the mountain shifted. Anna didn't fight their strength. She didn't try to push back against them. Instead, she moved like a shadow. She dropped her center of gravity, slipping through the tiny gaps where their joints met. She used a series of small, precise pivots. To the people watching, it looked like she was vibrating. One by one, the big men began to lose their balance. They weren't being pushed. They were falling because the person they were leaning on was no longer there to support their weight. Within 15 seconds, Anna was standing 3 feet away from the pile, and the 5 giants were stumbling over each other, trying to regain their footing. "Strength is a lie," Anna said, not even out of breath. "If you rely on your size, you are giving your opponent a map of how to beat you. You are heavy, you are slow, and you are predictable." She walked toward the front row of recruits. "Most of you think that being a soldier is about being the toughest person in the room. You think it's about winning the fight. It's not. Being a soldier is about control. Control of your environment, control of your ego, and most importantly, control of yourself." She pointed back to the 5 recruits who were now standing up looking humbled. These men tried to use force because they didn't have control. The men in the mess hall tried to use intimidation because they were afraid of being ordinary. They wanted to feel powerful, so they picked a target they thought was weak. She paused, letting the words sink in. "In this career, you will meet people who don't look like threats. You will walk into villages where the most dangerous person is the grandmother sitting on the porch. You will face enemies who don't wear uniforms and don't play by your rules. If you judge a threat based on size or gender or how loud they yell, you will not make it home." The room was so quiet you could hear the distant sound of a bird outside. The recruits weren't smirking anymore. They were leaning in, hanging on every word. "The 5 men from last night are gone," Anna said. "They are being reassigned or discharged, not because they lost a fight, but because they failed the most basic test of character. They proved that they couldn't be trusted with the power this uniform gives them." She looked at the young woman she had nodded to through the window the night before. "You don't need to be the biggest person to be the most powerful. You just need to be the one who understands the situation better than everyone else." Anna turned back to the colonel. "I'm done here, sir." The colonel stepped forward, his face solemn. "Dismissed," he told the recruits. As the rows of soldiers began to file out, they didn't rush. They moved with a quiet, reflective energy. The ghost of the mess hall had given them something much more valuable than a fight story. She had given them a mirror. Anna picked up a small bag from the side of the mat. She didn't wait for applause, and she didn't stay to chat. She walked out the back door, heading toward the airfield where a transport plane was waiting to take her to her next assignment. As she walked across the tarmac, she felt the familiar weight of being invisible again. Her job here was done. She had dismantled a toxic pack, saved a few careers, and taught a lesson that would be whispered about at Fort Sterling for years to come. She climbed the ramp of the plane and took a seat in the back, pulling her hat low over her eyes. As the engines began to roar, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She was just a quiet woman in a faded uniform, heading toward another place where someone, somewhere, would make the mistake of thinking she was easy prey.